All right, everybody. Welcome to just woke up. Welcome to part 2 of us discovering the symbiote lore. If you haven't already, you can check out part 1. Playlist should be linked down below in the description. And also, while you're there, if you haven't, go and support Sir Superhero. Link at the very top of the description, like always. Without further ado, let's get right back into it.
And now that everyone has an idea more or less of how the symbiotes work, it's time to get back to the history. Where we left this off, Null had been defeated and imprisoned in Clintar, with the symbiote species going out, spreading across the galaxy, and being aliens of all various moralities.
It is kind of hilarious that Sir Superhero is kind of giving us a recap here as well. It's almost like he knew.
You're right.
Now we're going to zoom in a little bit and talk about the history of symbiotes, specifically as it relates to Earth. Now, a lot of this is going to have to do with Venom, but we're not going to start there because, well, remember how Thor beat up a couple of dragons a while ago? Of course, that had consequences. We don't know what happened to every symbiote that split off from the original dragons, and in fact, a lot of them probably died, given that they were injured and cut off from Null's control for the first time, but enough of them survived to begin symbiote cults. This might seem like a minor continuity error at first. After all, wasn't being severed from the hive mind the thing that let symbiotes be free of Null and independent? Yes, that is true, but remember, it wasn't an immediate process. All the split did was allow the symbiotes to be influenced by their hosts, so they did not turn good immediately, and several of them tried to reconnect with their god.
That is probably a symbiote drawing I could do.
And yeah, magical slime aliens whispering about a primordial god of darkness into the ear of 5th century humans is absolutely the kind of thing that would make a very successful cult, one that did last until the modern day. Two things we need to address about these cults. Well, one that we need to for the lore, and one that's just a fun fact. The fun fact is that while the Cult of Null predates the Marvel Age of Heroes by a very long time, it does have a direct line to it in the form of one of Cletus Cassidy's ancestors. This is Cortland Cassidy, and he is just as bad as his descendant, but also doesn't matter nearly as much as you might think he does.
My goodness, is it just, does evil flow through their blood? Is that what's happening here? Is evil a genetic trait?
Crazy.
He's only been in 2 comics ever. Still, fun connection. The more important piece of lore is that this cult gives us a chance to address Null's most iconic symbol. No, it is not a red dragon, as a certain piece of Venom lore would have you believe. It is instead a red spiral. You may have noticed this in the video already. Yeah. Symbiotes that instead of the iconic white eyes have this massive spiral covering most of their face. This is a direct indicator of Null's control. This is why you see it on all of the early symbiotes. This was when they were under their master's control or had just recently broken from it. But now that's not a problem anymore. After all, Null is trapped in Clintar, his consciousness suppressed by millions if not billions of symbiote consciousnesses in close proximity to him. So seeing the Null spiral in the present day would be a really, really bad thing. Hopefully that never happens, right?
Yeah, definitely. Null will never return.
No.
There ain't no way he can escape out of that trap.
Anyway, the next big symbiote event on Earth is when the Null spiral shows up again.
There you go.
Yay! This mark on the timeline takes place during the, get ready for a wild tone shift here, the Vietnam War. Not like a fancy sci-fi version of it. No, this is just the real Vietnam War, but in Marvel, which means there was also sci-fi stuff happening a little bit. You might understandably be wondering why the Vietnam War matters for this. I mean,
there's just so much media from America that is set during the Vietnam War era. I guess it's just a vibe for people. Although
a vibe?
I'm glad that I wasn't there. Yeah,
maybe
sounds
just
horrific,
a significant historical event that a lot of older people would remember.
So it's one of those wars that people still remember about or were there for. Like, we're not too far ahead in the future for that to be distant past.
Seems like a very random place to do a symbiote story, and it is. Except, this arc happens because of a pun. I kid you not, this storyline is referred to as Venom.
I don't even know what to say. Some people just have a twisted sense of humor, don't they? Venom, is that a freaking symbiote with an assault rifle?
So back in Nam, the US military was looking for any edge that they could use to win the conflict, and found a wild one thanks to some investigation by S.H.I.E.L.D. Once again, call back to Thor fighting the dragons. Yeah, turns out he did not kill one of them, and merely incapacitated it enough that it was frozen in ice. As they always seem to do when confronted with anything even remotely.
This is like such a classic shot for any gigantic beast, world-ending beast or whatever, to have been frozen in ice with a bunch of scientists surrounding them, experimenting on them and doing tests. Thinking of the the MonsterVerse movies with Godzilla and King Ghidorah, stuff like that. It's just an iconic shot. I wonder who started this. It probably had to be like the kaiju verse or whatever, but I'm not too well versed in that.
I would not know.
Yeah. I just think giant dinosaur looking monster fighting each other while toppling city is cool. That's all I know about it.
That's valid, yeah.
The military decided to try this as a form of super soldier augmentation.
Of
Enter
course.
the Sim Soldier program. Not entirely understand.
Sim Soldier program. If I didn't know any better, I think they just inserted SIM cards into their soldiers so that they could communicate with each other.
Understanding what this dragon was, S.H.I.E.L.D. extracted samples from it, which were of course symbiotes, and bonded them to several men, creating effective super soldiers, at least for a while. See, if these had been normal symbiotes, maybe this would have gone better, and we will see the military try something like this again in future years. But these were not present-day symbiotes. These were symbiotes that had essentially been in stasis for hundreds of years, and had gone into that stasis right after being split from the hive mind. These symbiotes had not been infected with good ideals. They were still loyal to Null. And remember, these dragons are big, large enough that they can kind of act like a nexus point for the symbiote hive mind. So with one of them free and running around, Null could not reconnect to it per se, since his connection was more put on hold than actually cut off, but still, he could exert his influence. And it didn't help that the military was ripping pieces out of the dragon to infect people, which hurt very badly. And so with a tortured dragon hive mind nexus, what do you think would happen happened? Most of the...
I don't know, man. We really just have some massively big brain moments from the military here. Every single time. In all pieces of media. Also, is that supposed to be Logan? I guess he was there, right? Man has been around for a very long time.
I think so.
Sim soldiers went on a no bloodlust rampage, but were defeated by other S.H.I.E.L.D. operatives and Wolverine, who was also in this project for some reason, at which point the Grendel dragon was contained within a secure location, where I'm sure it will remain secure, because of course the point of this one-shot comic is to establish the containment of a dragon and how safe it is and how that will never matter again.
This dragon will remain contained and safe as much as the zombie Fantastic Four will remain contained and will not escape. That definitely won't happen.
There is technically one other piece of symbiote history related to Earth specifically, that being a very weird little guy named Flexo. A long story short, he's an old comic character where he was a robot made of space rubber or something like that, and in the modern day, writers decided that space rubber might be a symbiote, and so they retconned it and recontextualized his origin into being a lot scarier.
What the hell? What happened to you, Flexo? What happened? Imagine being like the biggest fan of Flexo ever because you like how like round and nice looking he is, and then he turns into that. Bruh.
It still has.
I'm not going to go into it here because Flexo is ultimately tangential to the main storyline of the symbiotes. Also, my buddy Comic Drake did a whole 11-minute deep dive on it where you get everything you need to know about Flexo. So once you're done with this video, you can just go and watch that one if you're craving more symbiote stuff. Now, after a shocking 40 minutes where he was barely mentioned, we are finally going to talk about the history of Venom specifically. Though I do need to establish two things before we do that because this is where things are going to get a little bit weird timeline-wise. First off, I just want to make it very clear what we're going to be covering in this section. This video is intended as a history of the symbiotes, not a history of Venom specifically. And while a lot of it is going to revolve around Venom, we're not...
I mean, I think from my understanding of the symbiotes so far, Venom is a tiny part of that history during the beginning. Of course, his role becomes much, much bigger later on in the series. But at the start, he's just...
Yeah, so he's like a small piece of the symbiotes, but at the same time, he's the most written symbiote, so...
Yeah. So a lot of the history that we get about the symbiotes is probably told through Venom or with Venom, kind of being there as a centerpiece.
Tangentially from Venom, yeah.
Not going to be covering every single story that this character has been in. I will hit the most important ones, but specifically the ones that relate to symbiote lore as a whole. Otherwise, we will have over 800 comics and counting to cover, and I simply do not have the time. I am going to talk about Venom's origin, though, because I assume people are curious, and that's why the timeline is going to get a little bit screwy. Venom is old, probably older than you think, and his story does not begin on Earth. So while I'm presenting most of this in chronological order, if I did it strictly by chronology, then I would have to divert a while ago, talk about Venom out in space, then go back to Earth, do all the Earth stuff, and then return to Venom in the modern day. So we're just going to backtrack, tell the origin of Venom from start to finish, and then get back on track. I hope that makes sense. The symbiote that would become Venom is not actually named Venom. This is a code name that it uses because it's easier for humans to understand, but its true name is in the symbiote language, which as a hive mind species is very difficult for other minds to process. The earliest days of this symbiote are a little bit convoluted, mostly because they've been through a lot of retcons. You could probably tell from everything else in this video so far, but symbiote lore is very complicated now, and a lot of that is because of comics that have come out in the last decade or so. Some comics have stated that Venom was born during the reign of Null, which was a very, very long time ago, but others have shown flashbacks to it which take place on Clintar, and that would be a little bit later in the timeline. The Clintar one seems to be the current canon, so that's what I'm going to go with. Regardless, the most important thing about Venom's birth is that he wasn't particularly special. Venom is not a chosen symbiote or a super symbiote.
He's just a regular dude who's also a part of the whole hive mind. Well, yeah, if he's born during Clintar, that he's not a part of the hive mind anymore. But then that would also kind of retcon the fact that his name was impronounceable because it was part of the hive mind.
Well, the symbiote language, it was developed from the hive mind.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I can see it as that.
Or anything like that, he is a regular one just like any other member of the species, and he is described as the 998th in his lineage. It's early
998th? K49, is that you? Oh, I guess K49 would be Carnage. No. But, you know what? Actually, that makes sense. if you guys are wondering what we're talking about, check out the KOF lore. It is insane.
Days on Clintar seem relatively uneventful, but we do know who the symbiote's first host was. In fact, we know very well because there's an entire miniseries simply called Venom First Host. At some point, the symbiote was picked up by exploring Kree, who decided to use it as a living weapon in the Kree-Skrull War. This is where Venom would make his first bond to a Kree soldier named Tel-Kar. Tel-Kar was ultimately heroic, a little bit insane, but a good soldier nonetheless, using the symbiote's...
I find that in actuality, the difference between heroicism versus insanity is quite thin. Like,
yeah, oh yeah.
You gotta be a little bit crazy to go out of your way to do the things that you need to do in order to be a hero, but sometimes if you step a little bit too far, then you're just a crazy mad person who's doing things because of self-righteousness or making yourself feel better.
Kind of back to altruism itself is inherently illogical, which when you drive that out to like heroism and complete like extremes, Yeah, that makes sense.
I think it also really depends on how you want to view it by what you believe in, whether humans were born inherently good or inherently evil. And the act of good is simply just us acting against our nature, forcing ourselves into doing something against our nature. It's hard to say. Because some people fit into a certain category, others seem to fit into a different one. Human beings are complicated. Who could have guessed?
Shape-shifting capabilities to infiltrate the Skrull army, as he could pass for one of them more easily. This worked for a while, but eventually he was captured, and the symbiote managed to escape. Now isolated, the symbiote ended up on an ice planet, where it was forced to bond with a native alien in order to survive. Unfortunately, this native was extremely violent and brutal, and since Venom had to stick with it for so long, some of those ideals seeped into the symbiote's own consciousness. This is the canon reason why the symbiote is a little bit insane and psychopathic. No, it's not because of Deadpool. That is a common misconception, but it comes from a joke comic called Deadpool's Secret Wars. In fact, I can show you the panel that started the misconception. This comic has a thing where Deadpool very briefly bonds to the symbiote before Spider-Man does for the first time, but he does not last long enough for his insanity to bleed over. There's a panel where he says he hopes that doesn't happen, and that is where people are kind of getting this idea from. But this is not like a joke saying that the symbiote is insane because of Deadpool. It's exactly the opposite. This is Deadpool saying, I don't want this symbiote because I don't want it to be insane, and then ending the bond before any bleed over can happen. Also, yeah, Deadpool looks like this in this comic, which should be another indicator that this one was not particularly serious when it comes to canon. Now there's a little bit of a gap in Venom's history, or to be more specific, there's kind of the exact opposite of a gap. The next part has been described in so many different ways that I have no idea which one of them is technically canon. Regardless, the symbiote is imprisoned. Several different groups have been stated to be the ones who imprison him, and I do not know which is correct, so I'm just not going to bother working it out. The symbiote is imprisoned, that's the part that matters. Then the canon will stay hand-wavy for a minute because somehow Venom's prison canister gets incorporated into the Beyonders battle world back in the first Secret Wars event. I'm really surprised that there's not a better explanation as to why exactly this happened, but if there is one, I could not easily find it. It really seems like he just kind of ended up there when the Beyonder was making his pocket dimension, and that's it.
I mean, this is what we were talking about in the first part, right? Like, the symbiotes survive without a host for as long as the writers need them to. Oh, man.
Now we finally reach, by publication timeline, Venom's first appearance in 1984's Secret Wars number 8. In this comic, Peter Parker, while in the Battleworld Pocket Dimension, finds a weird device that contains a small black blob. He then touches it. Great idea, Spider-Man. Touch the weird alien thing you've never seen before.
Spider-Man is just like so many other people who are on like the subreddit, what is it? And then there are just so many videos of people being like, what is this? While holding a literal poisonous insect or animal in their hand, touching it barehanded. What are you doing if you don't know what it is? Just take a picture of it, poke it with a stick maybe. Probably don't do that too. It might shoot venom at you. You never know. It's like... God, humans can be kind of dumb. The fact that we're still alive somehow is a miracle.
And it turns into what he thinks is an alien costume. I do want to very quickly sidebar here and say that the real-world writing origin of the black suit is a weirdly debated and interesting thing. I'm not going to go into it verbally because...
Okay, well, I'm kind of interested here. Back in 1982, Marvel ran a contest where fans could submit designs and ideas for their characters. A guy named Randy Schueller pitched a story where Spider-Man got a black stealth suit, and ended up winning, receiving $220 in prize money and a chance to write the story he suggested. The writing fell through, as by Randy's own admission. The scripting format wasn't for him. Hey, that's fair enough. Not everybody can be a comic writer, yeah. Then, a few years later in 1985, Marvel released Secret Wars, where Spider-Man got his new black-suited look. This has caused controversy, as Randy claims Marvel took that idea from him. The issue that complicates this is that Randy's suit design was black and red, with different details, and his story pitch was entirely different than Secret Wars. meaning that the only similarity between his design and what Marvel did was the base color black. This has sparked arguments in the comic space about whether that's enough to call it a stolen idea or just coincidence. Either way, he knew the rules of the contest and was paid for his work. I'm not personally going to weigh in on which side is right, but I did want to acknowledge the history. Gotcha. I mean, yeah, it's hard to say. You gotta, prove without a doubt that this is something that was taken from you and just straight up copied. If it's not a straight up copy, it's much harder to really prove that, I think.
The problem, I think, comes back. Costume designs, especially back then, are quite simple and hard to, shall you say, you're going to have, if you have 3 people design 3 costumes, there's going to be overlap.
Oh, yeah.
Right? For the same character. And we've gotten to a point where things have gotten more complex, and to the point at which a lot of comic fans think it's gone too far. But back then, especially. So for something like this, it more so probably comes down to who was the artist and what was the intention. And I don't, especially without any more context, so let's give it here. I certainly can't know that.
Yeah. It's just...
But there's a high chance it's just coincidence.
Yeah. It's hard to say, it's hard to prove, because obviously a lot of this would be happening behind closed doors, and the intent and stuff, you can't really prove in court. It's like saying, oh, this other fighting game copied Street Fighter because it's also a 2D fighter with characters that fight each other. It's like, yeah, obviously it's probably inspired directly by it, or, it could be that they just had the same idea.
I was talking to Argoth earlier because I saw a post on Twitter of one of the DNA guns versus a Warframe gun. And they're like, look, they're copying the designs. I'm staring at this thing. I'm like, these just look like the same, gun, but the designs are completely different. Yeah. Right? A gun is just a gun. If you're going for the same style of gun, that's just what that is. I don't know what to tell you. But the actual, details look different to me, and I'm like, I think this is a stretch. I don't know.
You're telling me that Battlefield copied the AK-47 from Counter-Strike? How could they? It's gone. What do you want from me? It's a gun,
right? I don't know.
Because it's kind of a tangent that's not lore related, but I am saying it verbally because I'm going to put it in a big text box on the screen, and you can read it if you like. Anyway, at this point, most of us kind of know how this story goes for the next few chapters. Peter continues to wear the suit, not thinking anything bad of it, and liking the convenience. After all, it can generate its own webbing and also be deployed and retracted at will. So for Spider-Man, who often needs to change costumes and worry about web fluid, this is an ideal situation. The symbiote, for its part of the dynamic, actually likes this relationship quite a bit. It in and of itself is not evil, plus it starts assimilating a lot of Peter's heroic ideals. This thing likes fighting crime, and it wants to do so more often, so it starts puppeting Peter's body around and fighting crime independently. While not an immediate problem at first, to such an extent that Peter himself is not even aware of what's going on.
That is actually kind of cool in a way. It's like, all right, buddy, I'm gonna go to bed. You take over for a little bit. Crime never stops. It's like happening 24/7. So having somebody there to do the job for you in a way can certainly help out a lot of people.
I think the problem is Pete didn't know it was happening at first.
Yeah, there was really no consent there. Consent is very important.
Does start to take a toll. The symbiote most often takes over him when he sleeps, and since his body is then being active almost 24/7, Peter starts to feel exhaustion constantly. This eventually gets to a point where Peter starts...
Is that why you feel constantly exhausted, Serby?
Oh, maybe. There's a symbiote crime fighting at night with me.
I think that symbiote's name might be Batman.
What? Batman? Is this true?
I mean, Batman is the right color to be a symbiote. Also, in case you guys don't know, Batman isn't, actual Batman from DC. We're referring to Serby's Pomeranian doggo, who you can sometimes hear in our videos.
starts to become suspicious. His exhaustion, plus the fact that what he thinks is a costume is acting more and more organic, sets off alarm bells, and he, with the help of the Fantastic Four, starts to investigate it further. With the Four's machines, he realizes for the first time that the costume is in fact alive.
A little sooner tried to figure out what it is.
Yeah, I mean, as a scientist, I feel like I would want to know exactly how this thing works so I can maybe use it for something else. Or, for the betterment of people.
Or just, I have weird thing that does things that I don't know how. Maybe I should understand it a little better before I just
is this thing killing me every single time I use it? I don't know.
That it likes Peter a lot and wants to bond with him permanently, which Spider-Man wants nothing to do with. With the Four's help, Peter is able to remove the symbiote and contain it, though it will shortly escape and pursue Spider-Man once again, hoping to solidify their bond. This leads to the iconic confrontation in the church that has been adapted into pretty much every form of media. Injured by the sound waves coming from the bell, the symbiote flees into the church's lower levels and Peter is free. Then, the symbiote goes on a Deadpool adventure very briefly because, I don't know, man, Deadpool comics really just like ruining the Venom timeline and I am kind of bitter about it, but at the end of this officially canon Deadpool story, it just returns to the church where the fight happens, so...
What the hell? That makes no goddamn sense.
That's Deadpool.
That
is just Deadpool.
And thank you very much, IGN. All you need to know is that Deadpool plus Venom equal awesome. Very, very cool, IGN.
None of this actually matters. And then who should arrive but one Edward Brock? Eddie Brock was a disgraced reporter whose stories had been debunked by Peter Parker, leading to his career getting absolutely destroyed and a lot of other things along with it. His father had disowned him, his wife had abandoned him. It was a very bad time to be Eddie Brock. Things had gotten so bad for Eddie that he was considering taking his own life, and arriving at this church was his last attempt at turning things around. He was there to pray, hoping he would find some sort of forgiveness, and something else found him instead. Thus, Venom was born. At this stage,
Man, Venom is such a chonky boy here in these, very early comics. I guess it's because Eddie is a chonky boy, but...
full-on supervillain. The symbiote bond between Eddie and Venom was motivated almost entirely by mutual hatred. They were a good match for each other, as would be explored upon later, but at this point, the symbiote was only interested in Spider-Man and was basically using Eddie as a rebound, something that he could use to take out his vengeance while also trying to get back in bond with Peter again. Then for his next many appearances, Venom is simply a Spider-Man antagonist. This is the classic era of Venom, but we're not going to be talking about it a lot in this video, because at this point, Venom was just a weird alien without a lot of lore and all of...
Yeah, I feel like being reduced to just another one of Spider-Man's villains is not all too interesting. You gotta fight him, he goes away, he's a little bit weird, he gotta have similar powers. But then later on, it gets expanded upon, I would assume. We are kind of jumping around in the timeline, but
funny dude.
Yeah, funny dude.
He was a good villain, but yeah.
I mean, look at this comic cover. This one it's both scary and kind of hilarious, maybe a little bit cute. I don't know. It's got a lot going on for it.
I think people forget how dorky Venom was at points.
Yeah.
Venom was a silly dude.
I mean, oddly enough, that's one of the things I think some people enjoyed from the Venom movies was that, they made Venom dorky. They made Eddie kind of an idiot. That's Eddie, and that's Venom, and that's kind of their relationship.
Clintar stuff would come later. For the next several years, he fought Spider-Man a lot, he joined up with the Sinister Six, he threatened MJ, you know how it goes. The next major storyline for our purposes comes after...
Which is still really weird that now, MJ and Venom are now bonded with each other, despite that whole trauma that MJ experienced with Venom directly. It's like,
Yeah.
I guess she just got over it. It's fine.
After the symbiote's apparent death. Venom got caught in the crossfire during a battle between Spider-Man and lesser-known villains Styx and Stone, and the powers of Styx apparently killed the symbiote, but it would later be revealed that this was just a forced split between Venom and Eddie, at which point Eddie was taken to jail. The symbiote would later return to Eddie and break him out of prison, but it would leave behind a remnant in the process. This is the first chronological case of Venom reproducing, as a little chunk of symbiote was left behind in that cell, going on to bond with Venom's cellmate, a man named Cletus Cassidy. This is the origin of Carnage. As we talked about in the biology section, Carnage and Cletus have a perfect symbiote bond. This may be because they bonded almost immediately after Carnage's birth. That would make sense, though I'm honestly not sure if that's 100% canon. It makes sense though, so that's what I'm going to go with. We will come back to Carnage in a bit, as he is a major player in some stories that happen later, but for the next couple years of his appearances, he is just a more brutal, scary version of Venom.
Yeah. The cover art for all these Venom comics are kind of like goated. Like, I think it's because of the whole concept of symbiotes and just how fluid you can make the design that it feels like the covers have such motion to them. There's a lot of action and weight behind all their moves, and the morphing of the body and whatnot is just so cool.
In stark contrast to what Venom himself is doing during this period. After the prison break, Venom moves to San Francisco and decides to turn their life around, joining the side of good. They are still extremely violent during this, of course, but they are an anti-hero at least, earning them the now iconic title of Lethal Protector. Once again, a lot of storylines happen during this era, but sticking to the symbiote lore at large, there is one major thing that we need to cover, that being Venom's involvement with the Life Foundation. The Life Foundation in the comics began as essentially a bunch of very rich doomsday preppers. They were interested in the symbiote as a possible way to protect themselves in the event of an apocalypse, so they captured Venom and experimented on him. In the process of this, they pulled off something very interesting, which was forcing the symbiote reproductive cycle. By making Venom generate symbiote seeds, they gave birth to 5.
Oh. Okay.
That's right, Scream is the yellow one. Heck yeah.
Riot, Lasher, Fa? Agony? Well, I think the name is just cut off.
The name's cut off.
Yeah. And Scream.
I forget his name, though. Shoot.
I mean, both Agony and Scream, yeah, they're doing something for me, all right.
5 more symbiotes, which were given the code names of Riot, Lasher, Phage, Agony, and Scream, commonly referred to collectively as the Life Foundation symbiotes. The majority of these symbiotes don't have a lot of lore. You will usually see the Life Foundation symbiotes as a collective bonded to like villain henchmen or a military black ops group or something like that. They are often used as the some group is weaponizing symbiotes characters and aren't much beyond that. However, Scream is the only one that managed to find independent success, and is one of the very few symbiotes outside of Venom and Carnage to actually hold her own self-titled books. The miniseries Scream: Curse of Carnage is very good, and I would highly recommend it. Moving on from the Life Foundation, at some point after this, the Venom symbiote very briefly bonded to Eddie's ex-wife, Anne Weying. This was not a long period of time, but it's going to...
Oh, I mean, that did happen in the Venom movie, didn't it? Yeah. For a very brief moment in order to just rescue Eddie, basically. That was about it.
Be incredibly important later, so just remember that it happened. Now we're going to pivot entirely for a moment and detour into a special segment that might end up getting cut from the video if this runs too long. So if you're hearing this, congratulations, I decided not to cut it. Let's talk about symbiote natural predators. As a species, symbiotes are not necessarily the top of the food chain. There are 2 things out in space that will eat them. The first is the xenophages. These are, in the comics, not important at all. Xenophages barely appear ever, but the reason I want to bring them up here is that they are villains in the 3rd Venom movie, so I thought it was worth mentioning. Yeah. In the movie, the xenophages are just a different type of Null's monsters and used to control rogue symbiotes. That is not the case in the comics. In the comics, they are just a different breed of alien that eats symbiotes. Nothing really fancy there. So then why did I make this a whole special segment instead of just slotting in xenophages when they appear in the timeline? Well, the other symbiote predator is a lot weirder. Let's talk about the poisons. The poisons are a small parasitic species originating on Earth 17952, so nowhere near the main Marvel universe of Earth 616. In their natural state, they are small but quite creepy, kind of looking like part skeleton, part flower monsters. The feeding cycle of a...
I mean, these look like enemies that you'd end up meeting in Hollow Knight or something.
Yeah, kinda. They're kinda cool.
I wonder what happened in this particular universe to create these things? Or they were just there? Born somehow, a coincidence?
Poison is extremely weird because they hunt very specific things. To feed, poisons need to bond not just with a symbiote, but with a symbiote and host pairing, essentially inserting themselves as a third party into that dynamic.
That seems like a very specific thing. Like, I guess, do they need to feed often? Because I don't know if that happens very often. Or, well, I guess out in the wider universe, if the symbiotes are just kind of like spreading around, then there would be a ton of them, but here on Earth, there's just a few people, no?
When a poison inserts themselves into a bond, they gain full control over the other minds. The host and symbiote consciousness are totally suppressed, and the poison runs everything, including the natural abilities of both of the other organisms. This makes them extremely dangerous to symbiotes as a whole, and after dominating their home reality with this ability, they began to spread across the multiverse, taking over every symbiote that they find. This leads to the comic called Venomverse. Now, this might seem incredibly important, right? The fact that the symbiotes have multiverse-traveling super predators seems very vital to their lore. But here's the thing. Venomverse and the poisons are really just there to be cool. To be clear, I'm not criticizing.
You know, that's fair. We had a cool idea. We want to make it. Comics are kind of perfect for that with the whole multiversal thing. So you can do what you want. It's a little bit unfortunate that it's not canon, so it probably doesn't have any lasting consequences. But at least it was a cool story while it lasted.
Necessarily canon, just not super important.
This, comic books are comic books. They can do things just for the sake of cool. But yeah, that is absolutely what the poisons are. They have only appeared in a couple of comics, and they don't really have greater lore ramifications outside of that. They exist just because, because poison versions of characters look incredibly awesome. When you read the Venomverse comics, it becomes immediately apparent that the only reason these were written is because the designs are just incredibly cool to look at, and the creators wanted an excuse to make more of them. And since that is the point, I'll just show you a bunch of the designs. I've got a scroll of them going across the screen right now. This is nowhere near all of them. There are a ton, because the poisons only exist to showcase poison designs.
I actually kind of want a few of these skins in Marvel Rivals, not gonna lie, I mean, we already have like the symbiote bonded ones too, so I think this would be
not make that obvious enough, but
cool.
Hey, the designs are good, I'll give them that. And there we go, that's all I really wanted to do for the symbiote predator section. Now that
Wait. Oh yeah, there's all these alien vampire guys, which some comics call symbiote predators specifically. But also, like, they're vampires, and they seem to act like normal vampires, so I don't know if they should be counted as symbiote hunters, but here I mentioned them just in case. God, I love text boxes. They make my job so much easier. The captive alien vampire dudes. Neat, I guess?
Got some big teeth.
Very big teeth. I don't know if my dude can even close his jaw. I would assume the fangs go outside of his mouth, but that would feel kind of uncomfortable.
Now that I've addressed it, let's get back to Venom's history. After the bond with Anne, one more symbiote is split.
Okay, for the sake of timeline completeness, I should clarify that this clone would not actually become Mania until a decade after it debuted. The cloning happened in a 2003 comic, and the clone was brought back as a new character in 2013. Just a 10-year gap. I'm sure people remember exactly what happened.
Off, though this one is not Venom's offspring in the traditional sense. This one, which would go on to become the superhero Mania, is a literal clone of Venom. It was grown from a piece of Venom's tongue. At some point during this period, Eddie decided that he could no longer stomach the symbiote's bloodlust and sold it at a supervillain auction, which seems like it's not something that he should be able to easily do, but whatever, that's what happened. This was later bought by a member of an organized crime family who attempted to give it to his son. And attempted is the key word here. When the crime boss bonded Venom to his son Angelo, this partnership worked for a very brief period of time before Venom realized that Angelo was a loser and abandoned him in the middle of a web swing, leaving Angelo to plummet to his death. This is not relevant to symbiote lore at large, it's just funny enough that I wanted to bring it up. From here, the symbiote ended up with Mac Gargan, more commonly known as the Scorpion, and Mac became the main Venom for a while. He was still an anti-hero like this, technically, but far more on the anti-side.
Oh, part of the Thunderbolts? I see you.
Working with Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers and a more sinister incarnation of the Thunderbolts. This is also the period where Eddie becomes Anti-Venom, which we already covered.
Gotcha.
Now, I've been speedrunning this a little bit because this era of Venom is the one that has the least lore about the symbiotes as a whole. But I do need to pause and spend a little bit more time on this next host because we are finally at Agent Venom. Most of us know Flash Thompson in some capacity. It might be from the movies, where he's basically an entirely different character, but in the comics, he started out as Peter Parker's athletic high school bully, but he had quite a character arc going forward from there. This isn't even a recent thing either. Peter Parker and Flash Thompson made up with each other decades ago during their college days, with Flash acknowledging that he was kind of a jerk back in high school and the two becoming friends.
I actually really like the fact that a Spider-Man comic would have this sort of turnaround for the bully character to show that, you know, people can change, that we do stupid things when we're kids, and you can always become better. And it kind of also reinforces Spider-Man's whole belief in criminals as well, why he doesn't take lives, because as long as they're alive, they have the chance to change.
Flash would then go on to join the military, and tragically during his time here, he was gravely injured to the point of losing both of his legs below the knee. As an amputee, Flash became incredibly depressed, but was shortly approached by the military once more. Not the same branch that he had previously worked with, this was a secret operation called Project Rebirth.
The name of the program comes from the original Project Rebirth, which was the super soldier program responsible for making Captain America decades prior. Marvel calling this one 2.0 as if it's not like America's 50th attempt at a new super soldier is hilarious, actually. Well, you see, we tried, it didn't really work out, but this one's gonna be the 2.0.
Like, Steve Rogers wasn't even technically the first.
Yeah, I think there was a Captain America before then. Well, what's his name? Walker or something? But they kind of had to disown him or something because he murdered a man on the streets.
Him and others.
And others too, okay.
Walker became U.S. agent later, yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, only reason I know of him is because of the Thunderbolts movie.
2.0, which was an extension of the Sim Soldier program used in Vietnam. After the defeat of Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers, the Venom symbiote was removed from Mac Gargan and taken into military custody. There, they tested it, learning that there was a 48-hour window where the symbiote could not bond with its host in a lasting way. This created a sort of safe period in which somebody could bond with the symbiote for up to 2 days with no adverse mental effects or risk of permanent attachment. The bond was just as powerful though. The symbiote's full range of abilities were available to its host, and since the symbiote can control its own matter to form different body types, this meant that it could restore Flash's legs. Thus begins one of the coolest arcs in Venom history, with Flash Thompson using the symbiote to be a superhero like his idol Spider-Man, while also regaining his full mobility during the limited periods of time that he can use the powers.
This is such a cool concept. I didn't know about the whole like limited to 2 days time, but that is a good limitation for these powers, and sort of like a thing that you can use to set up certain stakes. Like if a mission may go longer, then we have a timer. We have a set timer that we need to get this thing done in. I like it a lot.
Agent Venom is one of those where it's like, I know Marvel Rivals can't add too many spider people because ultimately they're just going to be
There's
too
a lot,
samey.
yeah.
But Agent Venom's one of my favorites. It'd be cool to see him. Odds are low, but still.
Imagine they add Agent Venom, but it's just Flash Thompson in his like wheelchair form at first, and then he transforms into that.
That's his all. No.
And notably, Venom was not happy with this arrangement, at least not during the early periods. As a failsafe, the military was also injecting the symbiote with various suppressing drugs, so Venom was mad about the whole thing, didn't fully understand what was going on, and when those drugs wore off for short lengths of time, he would revert to his monstrous form. However, as Flash and Venom got to know each other better, they realized that they were extremely compatible. Flash also provided a very nice narrative contrast to Eddie in terms of his relationship with Spider-Man. Venom is extremely obsessed with Spider-Man, that's been true for a while. Eddie was also obsessed with the hero, but in a more
positive
violent,
way.
antagonistic way.
Yeah.
On the other side of this, Flash Thompson idolized Peter and wanted to be the same type of hero that he was. And this allowed the symbiote to explore that side of their relationship, becoming even more heroic in the process. Once again, we're going to have to skip over a lot of stories for time here because Agent Venom was not a singular arc. Flash Thompson was the main Venom for many years and was extremely popular. To this day, there are a lot of people who understandably prefer Flash as a Venom host over Eddie. The one other arc that we really need to address during this time for larger lore is Venom's time with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Yeah, Venom was a Guardian for a while. This is where the Venom Space Knight
Space
stuff
Knight
happened.
Venom skin is the one that everyone keeps saying is the Agent Venom skin in Rivals. Was like, no, it's not. It's something completely different.
Yeah, it seems to be very clearly this particular design for Venom, but
I think it's because
what
I
can
gave
you
it
do?
more shoulder pads, kind of like how Agent Venom has. But yeah, no, it's the Space Knight.
At Captain America's request, which shows just how trustworthy Flash was as a superhero, Venom became the Avengers liaison on the Guardians of the Galaxy and had a whole bunch of space adventures, gaining this more armored look in the process.
Cool.
This comic is the one that establishes a lot of the early lore around Clintar, which we have largely already covered. Of course, at this point, the stuff with Null was not added yet. That would happen years later, but Venom Space Knight is what establishes the symbiotes as an alien species beyond just Venom and a few isolated others. This is also where the Agents of the Cosmos make their first chronological appearance. I mentioned them a while ago and said they had one very important role. It is in this arc. They are the group that really establishes that Venom can be an independent hero because he's not just an evil blob of space goo, he is a member of a species, and therefore he can do whatever he wants. And what he wants to do in this time is be a good guy. Venom is not even an anti-hero during this period. He is just a straight-up good guy. Unfortunately for the symbiote, this would not last, as eventually Flash Thompson would return to Earth, and shortly after doing that, the symbiote would get corrupted. There were two factors to this. First, a bitter reunion with Spider-Man, which did not go very well, and secondly, more literal magic corruption at the hands of this demonic sigil called the Hellmark. Thanks to both of these events, Venom went on a little bit of a rampage, separated from Flash, but even once the corruption was toned down, he did not return to his favorite host out of pure shame. In a dark but surprisingly sad and interesting twist, it turns out that Venom liked being violent. Even though he was being more heroic around this period, there was still some part of him that liked that lethal protector era. He liked being a protector, but he liked being lethal just as much, and this corruption had reminded him of his more violent-based tendencies.
You know, I can kind of understand that. It's like playing Dishonored. You can stealth around and, do non-lethal, save as many people as possible. But man, it is way more fun to go chaos. it is just a lot more satisfying. And technically speaking, you are still getting the job done. You are still doing a good thing, just not in the best way.
I mean, it's something I actually really love about Venom as a character, is that because he picks up so many different things from his host, and you just kind of see him evolving over time, but then to have kind of a realization of being like, this is actually something that I feel and like as like an independent thought, even if there's other outside influences pushing him in different directions still, it grounds him as an identity. I don't know.
Exactly, yeah. A lot of these factors from all the different hosts that he's had have sort of accumulated into this being called Venom. And now Venom is deciding who Venom is. And that's cool. I kind of like him as an anti-hero. I mean, it's nice to see him as just a straight-up hero, but I think it gives the character more depth personally. Or maybe it's just my love for anti-heroes and like the morality behind that.
Sure. I like Venom as a hero. I like him both hero and anti-hero, but I like him as a hero more than a villain, personally.
I think we have plenty of really good villains for Spider-Man to fight against. We're really not short on stock here. So yeah, having somebody somewhere in there in between is nice.
He was so ashamed of this fact that he refused to return to Flash, thinking that
I got through literally every other production stage of this video and only then realized I forgot about Lee Price entirely, which is hilarious. Anyway, Venom had another host between Flash and Eddie. His name was Lee Price. No one liked him, and he's only been in 19 comics ever, during many of which he was a zombie. Oh, okay. Sorry to the Lee Price fans out there, I hope you both forgive me. You both forgive me? Damn.
The man deserved something better than what Venom apparently was at his core. Thus, the symbiote was taken into government custody again, but before it could be turned over to a new host, it was broken out by Eddie Brock. And so, Venom and Eddie Brock were reunited once more, as a hero, but as the lethal protector anti-hero status quo, which had mixed reviews from the fans. A lot of people really like Flash Thompson Agent Venom and did not like Return to the Old Form. But I'm an Eddie Brock fan, so I personally didn't mind it. As I've done several times, here's the obligatory acknowledgement that many independent Venom
I have trouble saying I like one more than the other. I think I like conceptually Agent Venom more, but it's hard to dislike Eddie Brock Venom, right?
Yeah. I can see arguments for both. It's really just a matter of preference at this point.
Happened during this time, though we have already addressed a couple of them, as this is when the poisons show up. And we're about to change sections of the video entirely. However, there is one more very important piece of Venom lore that we need to address before we move on to the next chapter, that being Venom's 7th child. Remember Tel-Kar and the comic Venom First Host? While that comic does tell the story of Venom's first host, that happens in a flashback, and most of the miniseries takes place in the present with Tel-Kar returning to Earth. This is where we get the 7th kid. In response to a coming crisis, which we are about to talk about, the Venom symbiote had started another reproductive cycle, and Tel-Kar, coincidentally, had found it around the same time. He had arrived on Earth with intent to claim his old symbiote back, but Venom didn't really want to do that. Therefore, Tel-Kar, in his mild insanity, tried to capture the young symbiote instead. They get into a whole fight about this, and it ends with Tel-Kar actually kind of getting what he wanted, as he
Is it crazy, or does this particular Venom design look like an alien from Ben 10?
He kind of looks like the hybrid, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what I'm picturing right now, but it feels somewhat familiar from the Ben 10 lore video.
I'll find a picture of the hybrid.
Yeah. I gotta see this. It's nagging at me. It's like, that I've seen that before. Kind of. Something in the same shape.
Here. Yeah, no, it's very similar to the hybrid.
Oh,
just white instead of black.
Yep. I see it.
He does end up bonded to the new symbiote, which is named Sleeper. Yes, the cool chemical powers one that I mentioned briefly in the symbiote biology section.
Yeah.
Sleeper and Tel-Kar are bonded, but Sleeper is absolutely in control, as shortly after the bond happens, the symbiote lobotomizes its host and flies out into space to go on independent adventures. He will make a reappearance.
I love lobotomization.
Just like, oh, well, guess he's done for. He got what he asked for. Not that it helped him.
The monkey's paw curls.
Oh, yeah. Totally forgot to come back and talk about it more later, and by the time I realized it was too late to add it verbally, so I'm doing it here instead. Sleeper became Dylan's friend and guardian, usually taking the form of a cat to do so. This disguise works consistently better than it should, given his pattern, and it's pretty funny. That does not look like any normal cat. I'm assuming the son.
Eddie's child, kind of. It's more complicated than that.
It always is with comics, yeah.
I don't know if he'll talk about Dylan or not, but yeah.
We'll see.
Later, so we will come back to him, but for now I want to go into another sidebar section, though not completely disconnected from the lore, as this is a...
Okay, even later he bonds to a man named Hank Hensley, and then Rick Jones, taking the title Sleeper Agent, removing his host memories of their...
It's kind of funny.
Yeah. I mean, with a name like Sleeper, I feel like this was inevitable, and this was probably planned, but yeah. Removing his host's memories of their heroic exploits every time to keep their identity under wraps. Yo, Sleeper Agent, actually.
Yeah, that's pretty sick, actually.
Yeah, it's such a cool concept because, I mean, there's this whole, like, psychological thing in the training behind the concept of the Sleeper Agent. that would make them do this, but now you actually have a symbiote that manages all this. That's nice.
Well, the fact that Sleeper just initially has a history of just fucking with people's brains that he hosts.
Oh, yeah. Just straight up lobotomize him. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
The reason he has more chemical tech on his symbiote form like this is, to my knowledge, never explained, but damn, he does look cool in Sleeper Agent form.
Yeah.
It does seem very mechanical instead of the pseudo-organic thing that symbiotes usually are, but
I think he's just got a style, and I'm down for it.
Very important thing. We need to talk about Venom's family tree. As you may have picked up on, most of the Venom-specific storylines I've been covering are either the ones where he bonds to a new host, or the ones where he generates a new symbiote entirely. This is because the amount of symbiotes on Earth is about to be very, very important, and so I think the family tree is both relevant and also just kind of fun to see. I have made a whole diagram for this, though I'm also going to give you a peek behind the curtain and admit that I am recording the audio of this section before making the diagram. So this might be a little bit weird, but I'm going to do my best. This is actually going to be kind of fun, as I'm basically just narrating instructions to myself, and then I will listen to this as I go through and make the actual picture later. But regardless, we will begin at the top with Null. Null is the progenitor of the symbiote race, and then 998 generations later, we get Venom. Most of the tree under this is going to be Venom's offspring in one way or another. Now, there are going to be symbiotes that we haven't mentioned in this video on this picture because I wanted the image to be complete. Some of them we will talk about later, others just aren't relevant to symbiote lore as a whole, but still, this is the complete history. Venom's first direct offspring is the Carnage symbiote. Carnage then goes on to have 3 children of his own: Toxin, Scorn, and Raze. Carnage is also partially responsible for the creation of another symbiote named Rascal, with the other part of this symbiote coming from one named Bedlam. We will definitely be talking about Bedlam later. I would say that he's not on this diagram, but he technically is. Just wait, and that will eventually make sense.
Okay.
Venom's next batch.
All of Carnage's children look kind of badass, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
I'm assuming they're all villains too. So
Toxin actually is not villainy.
Okay.
But that's part of why he's kind of interesting.
It doesn't run in the blood.
Children are the Life Foundation symbiotes, the 5 siblings that were forcibly extracted from him. These, again, are Scream, Lasher, Phage, Agony, and Riot. None of the Life Foundation symbiotes go on to have any offspring of their own, so this is the end of their lines. Though in true comic book fashion, despite them not having any offspring, this is not where the diagram is going to end, because the Life Foundation symbiotes, and occasionally Toxin, have fused into a collective symbiote on a few occasions. The first time this happened, they formed a new entity called Hybrid, and the second time they formed a different one called Madness. These are treated like separate symbiotes, but they're also kind of not. I'm just going to stick them on the bottom of the tree and then we're going to call it good. Finally, we have Sleeper, who I just recently mentioned. Sleeper is Venom's youngest kid. He was also born directly from the symbiote in response to an upcoming crisis, and he also has no offspring. Technically, Venom has another biological child. This one is named Dylan Brock. Now, immediately, something seems weird about this. That's a normal human name instead of edgy words like every other symbiote is named. But this is not Eddie Brock's family tree, this is Venom's. So, what's going on there? Well, don't worry, Dylan Brock is going to be a main character for, the rest of this video, so we...
Oh, okay. So, yeah, we are getting into Dylan Brock. I actually really like
Dylan. Dylan is cool.
I'm not going to throw out any theories there as to why Dylan Brock is a part of the Venom family tree instead of the Eddie family tree, because all the things that I could think of, I can't really say on YouTube, so we're just going to move on.
We'll explain every detail. Moving on from more traditional children, we have other genetic offshoots, which I will, Future Show Superhero, put this on the left, that seems good. The main one here is a symbiote that I will call Mania. I briefly mentioned Mania already. This was a clone of Venom grown from part of its own tongue. Technically, it is not a different symbiote because it's just Venom again, but while it was being worn, the person wearing it used the code name of Mania, so calling it the Mania symbiote is easier. Then there's a section that I'm just going to call, nebulous duplicates. I'm going to be honest here. Cloning Venom is a very easy thing for a comic to do, and typically it only matters for, a single issue or a single arc. So there are a lot of other minor symbiotes that don't matter, which are technically Venom's children, and I'm just going to lump them all into this bubble. Also,
Roger.
on the left of this section, we have Sliver. I am putting Sliver over here because I have absolutely no idea what is going on with this one. Sliver is a symbiote that has only recently been bonded to Black Widow, and it has been openly stated as a connected symbiote to Venom, but we don't know how exactly.
I mean, cool future skin for Black Widow and Marvel Rivals. Hell yeah. Maybe. Potentially.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It does not seem to be a clone, as it both looks and acts differently, but it's also not treated as one of Venom's direct kids, and with how that canon is established to work, that wouldn't really make any sense. So, I mean, it's on the tree because it deserves to be there, and that's going to be good enough. I'm not going to elaborate. Unfortunately, I also have to do this again because there is another new symbiote in the same category. This one is Flicker, and it is a symbiote that has some connection to Alchemax. Some connection is the best that I can say, because Flicker has no lore whatsoever. This is the page where Flicker is introduced. It literally just says, "and introducing Flicker," and there is no more. I don't know. I don't know what's going on. It seems connected to the Life Foundation symbiotes in some way, which means it's probably related to Venom. Whatever. It looks cool. I like the color scheme, so I guess I'll just accept that it's here. Looking cool is kind of all that matters for side character symbiotes. And then finally, we will move to the right side of the diagram, which is the anti-symbiotes. Now, strictly speaking, I didn't need to put the...
Wait, there's Anti-Venom 1 and 2? The sequel that no one anticipated.
Anti-symbiotes on this tree because they are not symbiotes, but again, I thought it would be fun, and fun is...
All symbiotes, even the anti-symbiotes, have to have edgy names.
They're just cool like that, you know?
Yeah.
And I appreciate it. The Trudy within me says symbiotes are freaking awesome.
I agree.
Point of all this, so why not slap them on there? The first of this kind is Anti-Venom, which was created when Venom's biomass was exposed to the power of Mr. Negative. This symbiote would later be destroyed. However, through scientific experimentation, a second version of it was created. This is technically a different symbiote, but it's also just called Anti-Venom. I think the sort of unofficial name for it is simply Anti-Venom 2. And then from there, the process used to make Anti-Venom 2 has been done on matter from other symbiotes. We have an Anti-Scream named Silence, and an Anti-Carnage named Misery. So this, zooming back out, is the entire Venom family tree.
I like that.
yeah, I should have guessed. I mean, Silence does look really damn cool. I'm down for that. And we did talk about Silence earlier, I think. Yeah, when we introduced Anti-Venom.
Or at least most of them. Honestly, I would not be surprised if I missed a minor one, but hey, that's what the weird nebulous clones section exists for. As you can see, this is very, very large. There are a lot of symbiotes on Earth, and most of them have ties to Venom in one way or another. And as if this was not big enough, remember that this is just the symbiotes themselves.
2 to 3 of them are like actually just Venom's kids.
They're just clones of Venom or people doing something to Venom to create a new Venom that isn't Venom but is kind of.
And not the hosts. So if you want to talk about actual symbiote activity on Earth, this is only one small piece of the puzzle, as most of these symbiotes have been bonded to multiple people over the course of their history. Venom alone has been bonded to a lot. At this point, basically everyone important in the Marvel Universe has been bonded to a symbiote for at least some period of time, and this is the catalyst for things in the symbiote
you want to draw
world.
a Venomized version of heroes, that's just fun, and villains.
It's just really cool. It is a neat concept that can work for everybody, basically, because the Venom design just works.
Really going off the rails. Let's call back to the section on symbiote biology, because there is a part of that I withheld for dramatic purposes. A big point of that, and in fact a big point of symbiotes as a whole, is that the bond they have with their host goes both ways. The host mind and body can influence the symbiote, but the symbiote influences the host as well, and this continues even after the bond is done. This is going to be something of a twist, but at this point we need to introduce a new character to this storyline. A very important one, but also one that has not mattered to symbiotes at all up until this point. The Maker. Yes, like evil alternate universe Reed Richards, the Maker. The maker had been studying symbiotes for quite some time as part of something he was working on called Project Oversight. He had a theory that symbiotic bonds could help individuals survive travel between universes, and that was a big goal of his as he was from the original Ultimates universe and he wanted to get back there. Don't worry too much about that plotline. It kind of got canceled before it went anywhere, and the new Ultimates is largely unconnected, at least at the time of this recording. That aside, something that he discovered during this process is extremely relevant to the symbiotes. The maker had a big revelation in his research when, the Grendel symbiote escaped. Remember how the government had a gigantic symbiote dragon held hostage? Of course, that was not going to stay there the entire time. It breaks out, Venom fights it, and the maker gets his hands on some of the samples. If you'll recall, symbiotes were originally designed as agents of corruption in the service of Null, and while they have grown far beyond that singular purpose, parts of that remain in their evolutionary biology. The most key feature of that is something called a symbiote codex. When a symbiote bonds to a host, even if it's for the briefest period of time, a little piece of living abyss matter is left on that person's spine. This functions as a little transmitter to the symbiote hive mind, keeping a record of that person, their personality, their memories, their skills and abilities, etc., and in theory, transmitting it to Null. Of course, Null is suppressed at this point, and so it's not really going anywhere, but even though there's nothing receiving the signal, the codices were still around. The maker didn't really care about this. That was not something relevant to Project Oversight.
The of codex?
The codices?
Yeah.
I think so. I don't know.
Interesting. I've never heard that. I don't know that I've ever heard of a plural codex. Like I've never thought that word.
What? You don't talk about multiple codexes in your normal conversation? Or codices?
Not often, no.
Yeah.
Just a thing that he discovered in his research and therefore had in his records. And then his records were stolen by remaining members of the Cult of Null. Yeah, remember that cult from centuries ago that was still
Okay, yeah, this is leading straight into the resurrection of Null, I'm gonna assume.
Around, it is suddenly very important again. At this point, it was being led by Carnage, who they saw as a sort of dark prophet of their ancient god, and when Carnage found out about the codices, he got a devious little idea. One codex on its own is absolutely nothing. It is a signal to the hive mind, sure, but it's like a single blinking LED at the bottom of the ocean. There are so many other symbiotes out there in this residual hive mind structure that nobody is going to notice one codex being weird. But this is on Earth, and as we've already established, Earth happens to have a lot of symbiotes and a lot of action in which symbiotes are bonded to people. This means that Earth has a lot of codexes. And sure, one codex might not be very important, but if you can amass a lot of them, if you can link those signals together, then it might send out enough of a shockwave that you can talk to God. Now we reach 2019's Absolute Carnage event, which revolves around this.
Holy. Yeah, I'm gonna assume Carnage is gonna do a bad thing, and Null's gonna come back, and it's gonna be a whole situation that Venom's gonna have to resolve.
Carnage is gonna do a bad thing?
Yeah, no. I know. Hot take. Oh no. But yeah, dudes. I think that's where we're gonna call this part for now. And
the cliffhanger.
Still, it's super fun, man. There's so much behind symbiotes. Venom's character as well. It's so interesting. I love the symbiotes. They're cool.
Symbiotes are cool.
Yeah, but yeah. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed your time here. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will catch you guys in the next one. Later, dudes.
Bye-bye.